This is our second webinar to celebrate Black History Month. If you didn't see the first webinar, that was with Dr. Nara Chamberlain, a mathematician, and you can catch up on that on our website. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. John Ndikum, a pharmaceutical physician and a clinical doctor, to this webinar. This is going to be a fireside chat between myself and John, and I'm going to ask him a few questions and about his life, and also about working on the COVID-19 front line. And then after our discussion, John is going to read a specially commissioned poem that he wrote for FPM called From Calamity to Humanity. So without further ado, we'll start. So John, welcome. You're a doctor, a poet, a mentor, entrepreneur. Are you one of life's overachievers?
Hello, Marcia. Well, thank you for that introduction, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you, everyone who's here. Thank you for finding the time on a Friday, probably on your lunch break, to hear what we have to say in exchange. In answer to your question, I mean, it's flattering as everything that you say is. I don't consider myself an overachiever in any way. I think I just happen to be quite curious. I've always been a curious person, and I think I'm fortunate. Where I am fortunate is that I've got this creative inclination. I've got this creative side to my personality, which does compel me to kind of bring things from my mind outwardly. So everything that I do is really just the manifestation of just an inward creativity.
Thank you. And you're a doctor. So when did you know that you wanted to become a medical doctor?
When I actually mentioned that I wanted to become a doctor, I remember this. I was about 3 or 4. Oh, sorry, that's my alarm that I set for this meeting. Sorry, apologies. So I'm on the wards today. So
yeah, you're a working doctor, aren't you?
I actually had a dream that it was 1 p.m. and you were trying to get hold of me, and I'd missed the call. So I woke up and set the alarm.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was about 3 or 4. And my parents know that I've got this limp, and took me to the doctors, obviously, to find out what was going on. And I remember seeing these guys in white coats walking around, and I asked my dad, Dad, like, who are those people, in white coats? And he said, well, they're doctors. And I said, well, what do doctors do? And he said, they help people. I said, oh, wow, I want to be one of those when I grow up. And so obviously as a 3-year-old, it's just,
yeah,
people want to be astronauts or whatever. But that was the first time I mentioned it. In terms of when I actually seriously wanted to become a doctor was when I was about, I'd say about 14, 15 years old. I'd flirted with the idea of being various things. And I'd been inspired by Ben Carson's book, Gifted Hands, when I was 12. And I happened to be good at the sciences. And obviously, it just worked together. I wanted to kind of have a positive influence as much as I was capable of, and obviously use my skills, my strengths in that respect. And so it made sense to become a doctor, and having this, a black doctor who was, inspiring. I mean, so many people I know, so many black doctors I know were inspired by Dr. Benjamin Carson. So that's when I really started knuckling down and realizing that I need to get good grades, and I need to maintain good grades to have any chance of getting into medical school.
Yeah. And did you face any hurdles in order to get to medical school? I mean, many people do face hurdles, but I was just wondering about, did you have any specific hurdles that you had to overcome?
Yeah, I mean, the hurdles that I've thought about this actually, and I suppose I can categorize them as like, those, and so you can categorize at least my hurdles chronologically, quantitatively in terms of the amount, and then qualitatively, so my experience of it. In terms of chronologically, I would say that I've been fortunate in many respects. I've come from a household that's dedicated to academic accomplishment. I mean, that was the baseline. Anything distracting you from academic success was not really permitted, I suppose. So the focus was on doing well in school so that you could do well in society, as in terms of benefiting people. But in terms of actual obstacles, so chronological obstacles that I faced, And there have been obstacles, obviously. So we came here. I came to England when I was 8 years old, and fitting in was obviously an obstacle. And then I did well academically, but then the transitions. There's the transition when you're 13 years old, you're going through puberty, and then you're 16, and you might be distracted by wanting to be cool. I remember listening to Craig David and my collar, getting my hair done, and those were the things that were very important to me. And I suppose that was kind of an internal obstacle, if you will. So those are the chronological obstacles. And quantitative, obviously things happen in life that I wouldn't necessarily go into here, but things happen in personal life. Family members might get ill, and the obstacle has been, those are obstacles that I've had to try and so the challenge has been to stay focused in the face of all these obstacles. But I wouldn't say my obstacles are any different or any more than the average person would experience in their life. But I think the greatest obstacle for me has been my qualitative experience of these obstacles. I'm a poet. I do feel feelings. I do feel emotions very, very deeply, which obviously is what conjures up a lot of these poems. But it can be a challenge in a field where you must maintain equanimity and poise. And the challenge has been really just to maintain that poise, emotional poise and focus. And when there are so many distractions all over the place, and this is where mentors have been extremely, extremely useful.
Yeah, and going on from that, your route to Yale University in the USA is fascinating. Can you tell us about how that came about and how you got there?
Yeah, I mean, there were many fortuitous circumstances that arose, which led to me studying at Yale. I'd been in the NHS for about 4 or 5 years, and while I did enjoy the work, I noticed that there were obviously there was room for improvement in how the organization was structured to make sure that there was synergy between staff and organization. And I began pondering this and thinking, and I remember kind of doing mind experiments, thought experiments, thinking if you had this number of rooms with this number of doctors, if you move this here and you move this there. So I started thinking about how you would restructure things to optimize outcomes. And that's when obviously the idea of organizational level thinking came into my mind. I spoke with a few people. And so around that period, I began thinking at length about studying public health after having had extensive discussions with people. And I thought about it for months and months and months. And I did actually end up applying to the London School of Economics. And I, by chance, came across the director of the program. It's a public health joint program with the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. But I do remember on a night shift, I was finished the night shift, walking back home, again just thinking about public health and how I was going to try and make a difference in that. And I saw this tall chap, Drew Weil, who's now a friend of mine, saunter over. So it was literally part near my house. I was nearly home, and he had a cap that said the Yale School of Public Health. And obviously, I was intrigued, and I said, "Hey, man, can I ask you a question?" And he's like, "Yeah, man, of course." and I said, I probably shouldn't have said this, probably inappropriate, but I said, "Do you actually go to Yale School of Public Health?" And he went, "Yeah, I do." And I said, "Oh my God, this is incredible," because I've been thinking about going to, studying public health for a long time. And we get into this intense conversation, as Americans would say, on the sidewalk, get into intense conversation about public health. And I'm just buzzing at this stage, man. Like, I've got this Yale guy who's like listening to me, and I'm like, oh my God, this is, and so he's just listening, just being a really decent guy and listening. And at the end of the conversation, he says, "Do you know what, John? I think you'd be a great asset to our school." And I look at him and I'm like, yeah, you're funny, man. You're American. No, I mean it. You should apply to Yale. And I'm like,
wow.
I said no. Anyway, to cut a long story short, he ended up encouraging me to apply, making an introduction to the head of the program, the director of admissions of the Yale School of Public Health. And I did follow through, which they thanked me for. I think that's where I can definitely I can definitely take some credit there. But there were circumstances that were fortuitous. That certainly helped. And I did spend a long time on my application. I spent about 2 to 3 hours every day for about 3 months. I worked very hard on them. I had to get in touch with my referees. I mean, it was important that I had men.
3 months on your application?
Oh yeah. I mean,
wow.
I mean, my friend who got into Harvard and so forth spent about the same kind of time, because you've got various commitments. So you're spending. I mean, these American applications are rigorous, aren't they? They're looking for a whole rounded person. So you've got to be able to say in 500 words all of what you achieved in a compelling fashion. So I spent a lot of time, and I had to make sure that my referees had say glowing things about me. So prior to meeting Drew, I'd kind of spent 2-3 years making sure that everyone with whom I worked, I would impress. The whole point was like, I'm going to blow this out of the water and make sure they're impressed with me. So when the time came to actually apply, I had interest in public health. I had really strong background, really strong CV, and I had people who became referees that could write glowing statements. So I suppose in a way I was preparing for Yale for years before actually applying. And as you say, you said to me in a private conversation, luck is preparation and opportunity. So I had prepared myself over several years so that when the opportunity presented itself, I had that total package ready with which to seize the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, carpe diem comes to mind. You see something, you just went for it. Because a lot of people would be afraid to approach, but, you were bold and approached this person. So you get to Yale, right, and things are going well. And then you're exposed to some of the insidious racism that exists in the USA. Can you tell us about how your experience there differs from your experience in UK? On that respect.
Racism happens to be a poignant topic at the moment. Obviously it's Black History Month, about which people have various ideas. I don't want to go into the intricacies of all that, because obviously there are various subtleties there which can't be explored in this kind of discussion. But thank you for touching on that. I wouldn't say my experience of racism in America was so much insidious. I mean, it was very explicit, to the point where I suppose, intimidation by the police officers and so forth. The things that you hear on the news, despite my being what I consider preppy, I like my pink shirts and my chino trousers. So I was quite surprised occasionally to appear to have been accosted by police officers. So how does it differ to the experience in the United Kingdom? The United Kingdom is very different. I mean, here I would say it is insidious at the institutional level. You have to navigate accordingly. I mean, even mentioning it on this discussion is making me slightly uncomfortable, because the paradox of the situation is that as overt as racism might be in America, because they've been forced to confront it over decades, actually over centuries, it's actually much easier to have a conversation on race with white Americans in many respects, because they're not hearing it for the first time. Whereas with Brits, I mean, while a lot of progress had been made, certainly, and I don't want to take away from that, there's such discomfort around the discussion that even bringing it up does make people very uncomfortable. Now, one thing that I do have to highlight and point out is that tremendous progress has been made, no doubt. We can harken back to the riots in the 80s and the 60s, even here in the UK, in the modern Black community, as one of my mentors at Breach Society, Dwayne Neal, calls us, the modern Black community. We've had our own trials. And I cannot say that things are as bad as they were then. So one thing I must mention, and I think it's important for me to highlight, is that when we mention things such as Black Lives Matter or Black History Month, we're not taken away from the tremendous progress that have been made and how much more harmonious things are than they were, but rather we're highlighting how much more work needs to be done. And this is true of all facets of society. We haven't reached the progress that we have as a civilization by just laying on our laurels and saying, oh, do you know what? We've invented farming. We're just going to chill. So that's the point. The point is always, where are the problems and how can humanity become better? And I think this is what the enlightened philosophers were always trying to teach us. And this is the point. The point is not to take away from the good that people are doing, but to highlight how we can be better collectively in all spheres, be it sexism, racism, climate change, health disparity.
Yeah, and an important person who helped you get to get that perspective was Malcolm. Do you want to tell us about Malcolm? Because I was
Yeah.
quite moved when you spoke about him before.
Malcolm Gom was an architect and a businessman, and he was also a very senior figure in Rotary International. For those who aren't aware of Rotary International, they're a privately funded, private organization, but humanitarian organization. They were recently featured in the news because with their efforts, polio was able to be eradicated in Africa. So they've raised something up to the tune, I think, 300 million in concert with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to eradicate polio. I'm a Rotarian now. So Yale obviously wasn't free, and you know, I had to raise funding for that, and I reached out to Rotary International. I came across Malcolm Gom. I went through several interviews, and I obviously was awarded a merit scholarship to go to Yale. Malcolm and I kept in touch, but over time, Malcolm became more than just someone who's helping me secure funds to go to America. He would check in on my wife and my then fiance and I, who's now my wife, obviously, Sophie, on our well-being, to check how we were doing. He would encourage me so it wasn't as easy as securing funding and then sign the piece of paper. That was a process, and then Brexit happened, and the funding was, we weren't sure that we'd get the funding. It might not have gone through. There were a lot of obstacles there. It was very difficult, and many times I did actually throw the towel in. I said, this isn't going to happen. And Malcolm would call me and say, John, listen, one thing I've learned in life is that obstacles will happen, but you've just got to have that doggedness, that determination. And one thing I know about you is that you have it, and you're going to, I'm not going to let you give up on this. Yeah, that's how it happened. And I ended up going to Yale, keeping in touch with Malcolm. We moved back, and we had a difficult time finding housing again here, and Malcolm helped us to secure that. He actually used his own personal funds to help us buy furniture and so forth. And he passed away. It was a couple of years ago. He passed away of cancer. And what I later found out was that while he was helping me with this fundraising, I knew that he was getting chemotherapy. What I didn't know was how extensive the disease process was. Obviously, just to maintain confidentiality, I won't go into details here, but he was much more sick than he told us, and he'd kept a lot of it from my wife and I. So you've got this guy who's struggling with his own illness, who isn't sure whether he's going to live, but who's finding the time to help this random, I have to say this, you've got a white guy who's wealthy, he's well-to-do, he has no reason to go out of his way to do this. I'm coming from a completely different background. I'm essentially a nobody, and he's treating us more than family. And I don't think I realized the impact that he'd had on me until he actually passed away. And it really, thinking about him was really, really upsetting. It's really upsetting because he was like a father figure. And I think during times such as this, during the tumultuous times in which we're in, it's important to highlight these, because I'm not the only black guy who's had white mentors, and there are many white mentors who've had, white people who've had white black mentors, and vice versa. And there was a bond there. There was a unity there. There was a solidarity there. And I don't like to say, I don't want to go into the intricacies of things that transcend other things, but I suppose we were able to see a humanity in each other, a true humanity in each other, that helped us, I suppose, help each other. One of the most emotional things, one of my most emotional memories was when he was in the hospital bed, and my wife and I went to see him. And I said, Malcolm, thank you for everything that you've done. Thank you so much. And he said, John, it wasn't just me helping you. You helped me. You were my friend. And
Yeah, that's very moving. So you're back in the UK. COVID-19 has happened and you've returned to the front line to treat patients. How has that affected you?
So I was working in the pharmaceutical industry for 2 years, and there's COVID strikes, and there's this call for people to come forward and help. And I was in a situation there where I had that flexibility, and I did come forward and I did help out. And I'm still here, actually. I'm still working on the weekends, but that's likely to decline as my pharmaceutical career takes off. The poem actually mentioned this. The poem I'm going to read mentioned this, is that, you know, medicine as a career, the NHS as an organisation is usually very hierarchical. But what I found during the time of COVID, I can't speak for everyone, but I could certainly speak for the colleagues with whom I shared this, was that there was those hierarchical barriers, you know, that separated us were dissolved, and we became one unit. You know, I remember, you know, the nurse didn't see a nurse, the doctor didn't see a doctor. We just saw a group of people trying to fight this thing, trying to keep the NHS alive and trying to keep each other alive. And there was, I'd say actually, for the first time in my medical career, I felt a true sense of purpose. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't just ticking the boxes and jumping hurdles, clearing hurdles to get to a certain point in my career. It was really, truly about coming together and making a difference. So in terms of how that transformed me or changed me or affected my mindset, right, so I realized that actually, you know, human beings together, working together, can accomplish tremendous things. And while hierarchy is important in terms of getting things done, we must remember that hierarchy is just there to get things done. It's not there to define who we are, because ultimately the domestic on the ward was probably more important than me in terms of clearing COVID. And the humility that comes from that realization makes you realize the importance of solidarity. You can't do it alone. If I decide that I'm going to go on the ward, tell all the nurses and OTs and domestic staff to go out because I'm a superhero, there'd be no hope. And I think, you know, I hope as this virus begins to abate, I mean, not abate, as we begin to manage this virus better and things normalize, we need to remember how we came together during a moment of tremendous crisis. And we forgot about sex and race and the fact that I've got MBBS and that person doesn't. It was about, how can I keep you, your mental state good, so that you can keep coming back and doing good. And to me, it was the silver lining was that the silver, what is it, the silver lining?
Yeah.
Phrase.
Yeah.
Was that it was a moment of it was a true teaching moment, and it could in a way be framed as a tragedy that was beautiful at the same time. I don't want to take away from those who lost their lives. That was extremely sad, is extremely sad. But those who stayed alive because we saw each other's humanity.
When we spoke, you said that many medics now want portfolio careers as they do not wish to squash their other talents. Right, and you've mentioned about, you know, your poetry, and is that why you nurture your poetry? It's something that's part of you, and you need to bring it alive.
Yeah, this is an interesting question. I wouldn't say I nurture the poetry so much because I don't want that to be squashed. As anybody creative will tell you, musician, you mentioned that some of your children are, you know, quite creative.
Yeah.
And anyone creative, artist, singer, whatever it is, songwriter, it's a compulsion. Right, even business people are creative, right? That like they'll tell you that actually that, you know, the business plan came out on a handkerchief in the middle of a conversation. It's a compulsion. You have no choice. So I'd say it was more of a case of me trying to find balance between this compulsion and obviously my duty to society. I've been impressed by medics and medical school, just how incredibly creative a lot of doctors are. And what happens is that creativity does invariably end up being squashed in many people. And I think that's why they're pursuing portfolio careers, not so much because they want to nurture that, but because they realize that actually cultivate and continue to cultivate that creativity does engender, joy. It's an enjoyable thing when you've got this connection with some random aspect of the cosmos that gives you these insights. And a lot of doctors are realizing that actually you can have more than I suppose you can have your cake and eat it too. And I was speaking to one of the faculty of the Royal College of Physicians. He said to me, they've had to kind of acquiesce to the demands of their physicians who want to do less than full-time training. Because I spoke to a respiratory registrar who said she does 4 days a week, then 1 day a week of teaching. She's teaching is her creative thing, and she's just really happy. In terms of portfolio career, it's just remembering that actually you can be creative in many ways. One of which is being a doctor, but actually creative people also want to be creative in other ways. And it is not so much about work-life balance, but it's about being creative in a way that's in alignment with your idiosyncrasies. And you can do that without it negatively impacting your career, as I hope. This is why I do a lot of what I do in terms of publishing and publishing poetry books and all these kind of things to kind of show the younger generation that actually you can be creative in many different dimensions and still be good.
Yeah.
I hope, God willing, I stay healthy and I continue.
So, doctor, poet, mentor, entrepreneur, you got all these different dimensions to yourself. Do you just want to tell us about some of your entrepreneurial activities?
Yeah, again, this comes back to the topic of creativity. And then please, you put this list there, it makes me seem like some kind of like, I'm just a creative guy. And, without my mentors, these would have been distractions. So my mentors have helped me to focus my energy so that it comes out in this way that you've expressed. So, I just want to say that so that I can at least give credit to my mentors and the people in my life who've made all this possible. In terms of my entrepreneurial activities, I'd say they're an extension of that creative aspect. If you think about how we define entrepreneurship, I define entrepreneurship as adding value to the market. If you want to call it markets, I prefer to call it society. Okay, so bringing value to society in your own individual way. I suppose my entrepreneurial aspect is a lot about bringing value on the basis of the skills that I have. So I think my strengths, my mentorship strength, my ability, my training as a mentor my informal training as a mentor has allowed me to become more of a leader. My training in medicine has allowed me to become very analytically focused. My training in public health has allowed me to be a big picture thinker. So the entrepreneurial activities are very much about using what I have to add value to society. And I break that out into 3 branches. To me, the branches are obviously pharmaceutical medicine, which combines all of them, and public health. So I'm working with various organizations. And obviously there's the mentorship. And I set up Zero Entropy Consulting last year. I published a book yesterday, actually was published.
Just like that.
That aims to show students a framework for doing well in school. And hopefully I can, the next step is to speak with one of my friends as an English teacher, try and get that into schools, try and give talks of various kinds without interfering with my career. And so it's going to be an institution to add value. I suppose for me, the entrepreneurship aspect is about building an institution, Zero Entropy Consulting, to leverage my efforts, to optimize the way in which one person can add value to many people. So I'm still hashing a lot of that out, and I've got friends who are business people. One of my good friends, Seth Powers, he's very business minded, and we have these chats, and he's saying, how do we make it lean? How do we make it effective? Do I do talks once every 2 weeks? No, I can do talks maybe once every 3 months, and then still succeed in my career. So I've had to be very transparent with my employers about what I'm doing, and obviously reassure them that what I'm doing will not interfere with the value that I'm adding to them. And fortunately, people are intrigued, and they're very supportive. I know that wasn't a very clear answer, but
no, that's fine. That's fine.
I'm trying to hash it all out in my head about what my entrepreneurial activities are about.
Yeah. Well, thank you, John. That's been really enlightening. And as I said at the beginning, I commissioned John to write a poem for FPM that reflects his experience of working on the COVID-19 front line. And John's going to read this poem now, and I'm just going to share. I've put together a slideshow. Hold on, let me just get this ready. Hold on. Right, so I'm just going to get this slideshow ready and share this with you. And then John will read his poem whilst I go through the slideshow. So, John, when you're ready, please start.
Okay, great, thank you. So the poem, thank you all for listening. The poem is called Humanity in Calamity. I don't like describing poems, so I think it takes away from the essence of it. So I'll just start now. Humanity in Calamity. 'Tis said victory is sealed by guile, but this enemy did beguile those that it felt fit to assail, when even medicine was of no avail. A global conquest did ensue that struck not only a few, and politicking reached fever pitch, power extending beyond its reach. Yet amidst the storm, my learned friends did softly to others tend, and as a balm, the camaraderie made for a healing reverie. I witnessed love and harmony, a true spiritual victory, when what began as a global debacle became a blessed spectacle of nurses, physicians, and domestic staff, those of every clime and class, united risking life to patiently teach us the meaning of true humanity.
Thank you, John. That was wonderful. And I just want to thank you for giving your time, because I know you're working on the ward, you're very busy. I'm just
That's an extremely moving slideshow, by the way.
Thank you. I did that last night.
You know, can we just actually just take some time to just pay tribute to those who lost their lives? You know, I'm glad that you shared this slide, and those who were still fighting. I mean, we must never forget. We've been called heroes. They've been called heroes, but heroism doesn't have a deadline. And I suppose all of humanity, in a way, is we're all fighting this together. And so I suppose pay tribute to all of us and to ourselves, and try to be patient with each other as well.
Thank you. I will leave that slide up. Do you have time for any questions? I don't know.
Absolutely. I mean, I booked an hour for this, so I think we have half an hour left.
Yeah. So can I see the chat box? I might have to stop the slide so that let me stop the slideshow so I can see the chat box. Right, let me stop the share. Right, do we have any questions at all for John? You can either take yourself off mute or... so Judith Sullivan said that she attended Yale many moons ago. Do you want to come on, Judith, and say something? No?
Yeah, I'm coming.
Oh, here we are. Okay.
Yeah, hi, John. I just, again, it's a bit of a selfish question. The poem, my husband and I are practically in tears here right now. The poem was really, really very, very, very moving. And thank you, Marcia, for putting in all those wonderful photographs. John, just what were sort of your main impressions of New Haven and living there, both as a Black man and a Brit and a student and a mature student? It's a very selfish question, but I'm asking it anyway.
That's great.
Yeah, Judith, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for finding the time to come on here, and obviously for the comment. I'm glad that you found something useful in the. Well, I hope you found something useful in the poem. Can I ask you a question, actually, Judith? So, are you calling from the States right now, and what about your time in New Haven?
I'm in Roundhay, Leeds right now with my wonderful husband over here.
Hello.
Hi, guys. And I'm embarrassed to tell you when I went to Yale, but it was a long time ago.
Okay, great. So I'm asking the question. So I always said there were two Americas. There was New Haven, and there was Yale. New Haven was a rude awakening of sorts. Yale was wonderful. As you know, every Yaley, I mean, I can't speak for all Yaleys, but Yale forms a very strong part of my personal identity now. And in many ways, I suppose there is a kind of a, without being sexist, a fraternal feeling. So I'd say a feeling of solidarity. You know, I can't say a feeling of sorority because I'm not right, but so I'm trying to be funny, not funny. But there's definitely a sense of community. And when I come across a Yalie, I'm partial to them, and I find the same to be true as well. Because I suppose there are unique things that you go through at Yale, right? You go through very unique challenges, and then we're all kind of, we're like these weird abstract thinkers that think about things that don't actually impact anything useful. And we're all comfortable with each other for just being geeks. We're geeks for being geeks, right? Which is nice. Yale was transformational for me. I came across, you know, I started off as a, you know, I went in, sorry, as a doctor, very, I suppose, linear way of thinking, which is what a lot of medicine is about after a while. And then you go to Yale and you're surrounded by, you know, people from different fields. You've got 23-year-olds who are like outthinking you. They're thinking about things from different perspectives. They're challenging you. And it forced me to kind of be able to think about, or to communicate in an informed manner, first of all, and then be able to kind of preempt people's arguments before I spoke. I was certainly challenged intellectually. I was stretched. But what was amazing was just the fact that you've got these people who are just incredibly bright, and they're going around trying to do things that, you know, to improve the world. So you're walking around and there are people by, you know, by the chapel or by the library protesting, you know, for climate change, asking Yale to divest from fossil fuels. These are 18-year-olds, and they're organizing, and they're challenging faculty, and they're creating a positive influence. And seeing that over and over and over again was just remarkable. And then you've got these profs who are like very, very, very bright. At least the profs that I had were very, very bright. But the point I'm trying to make is that they were, not only were they bright, they were so down to earth. So you walk to a lecture, they're wearing slippers, they're just in their t-shirt and their shorts, they're just a normal person. And then they open their mouth and you're like, oh my God, this person is incredibly brilliant. But he has no airs or graces. Or, you know, this young professor who was Yale professor, I think she was in her 30s. And you're like, hey, prof, and she's like, oh, hey, do you need help? And you're thinking, wait, what reason is there for me to have an ego if these titans of the mind are just so down to earth? So I suppose in summary, I'd say Yale taught me the power of the individual to affect positive change if they can bring people on board. It taught me, actually, in a way, part of the solution to racism, which is if we can find something to connect, that connects us outside of the framework, of these limited frameworks that we use, that's where change begins. I see you right now, Judith. I don't see a white woman. I see a fellow Yalie. And I think, oh, she's up in Leeds. If ever she's in London, give me a call. And that was very important because at the same time I was facing a little bit of racism, a little bit, more than a little bit of racism in New Haven. I remember being in the ice cream shop and police staring me down and my wife noticing and walking down and people walking around me and trying to avoid me and all these kind of things. That was very jarring. And then having my white Yalie friends and my white friends in England calling me and comforting me. What was important was that in the midst of all this contrast, the good people in my life stopped me from, I suppose, prevented me from turning towards hate. Because when you do feel like you're subjected to what people can describe as oppression, I suppose a normal instinct is to turn towards anger and hate. And I realized that actually having wonderful people around you can help to check that and to remind you that actually the big picture is about recognizing a unity beyond, I wouldn't say that transcend, but beyond our currently myopic frameworks. I hope that answers your question.
Answer. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got a question from William. William, do you want to come on and ask your question? Or do you want me to read it?
I'll try and answer the question, Marcia. Thank you.
Thank you, William.
John, firstly, thank you very much indeed. It's humbling and really inspiring listening to what you've had to say. It really is. I said in my written comment that the closest I'm going to get to Yale is probably a key in my pocket. So all respect.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
But there's a tendency, particularly in British culture, to venerate institutions like Yale and Oxbridge and the big institutions and so forth. And I just wondered whether in this month of Black History, we need to think about not so much denigrating your achievement in getting to Yale, but seeing Oxbridge and the institutions as being symbolic of success, which prevents a vast majority of people who happen to be black or white from getting the recognition they may deserve, if that makes sense.
Let me see if make sure I've understood your question. So are you asking how do we take into account the contributions of people who might not have attended such institutions?
It is that. I think that we tend to over-venerate particular institutions, and I'm not suggesting that Oxbridge, Yale, whatever you choose to think, don't provide first-class education, but they're not the only places that provide first-class education. And encouraging people to aspire only to those citadels actually can be reinforce.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you raised a very good point here, and it kind of starts to actually, William, thank you for that question. May I ask what your professional background is in terms of career?
I'm a retired white grey git who was a civil servant once upon a time, and so a man of no distinction, but I'm happy in my life in that way. Yeah.
William's one of our trustees.
Oh, you are?
Okay, he's very good.
So just a regular Joe, huh?
Indeed.
Not really. But William, thank you. First of all, I like your approach, which is for me it's edifying because it teaches me how to be, how to be someone of accomplishment as you are. Yeah, have the I suppose not even humility, have the modesty to speak to someone like me. I consider myself a relatively, I'm still trying to achieve things. You speak to me as an equal, so thank you for that. The reason I asked about your background is because I think that question moves towards philosophy and metaphysics. And I wrote an article at the Yale School of Public Health recently that touches on this, in that the frameworks that we have in society are certainly myopic, they're certainly too limited, and they don't take into account the various dimensions of the human being. And obviously we must, I think we need to reappraise our concept of education. What we consider education, to my mind, is just it's qualification gathering, right? It's rote memorization. And as you'll know much better than me, true education happens outside of the school setting. So I think we must expand our frameworks of what education is. Yes, aspiration. I mentioned this in the book that I published yesterday about being aspirational. And I had a bit of a dialogue with a friend of mine as they said, how do you define aspiration, John? And there was a bit of a semantic war until we closed it, that actually what I meant by aspiration is seeking to improve in whatever field that you put your mind to, which could be aspiring to be the best mother possible, aspiring to be the best friend possible, wherever you can. And I think a lot of it is rooted in the physicalist model. A lot of it's rooted in the fact that we think matter is everything. So obviously, by extension, we're going to define success by things that fit that model. But a friend of mine made me aware of a concept of ordinariness, which I'm trying to achieve, and enjoying ordinary pleasures. And I suppose a personal, my own personal experience best answers your question in the sense that after everything that I'd accomplished in the academic sphere, I still struggled to find a true sense of contentment. And I'd say contentment is happening more and more when I've realized ordinary pleasures. And so the people that I gravitate more towards are people who you speak to them for 2 hours about random things, and then you find out that actually you're talking to a professor. And to me, that's a successful person. That's someone who's been able to extend themselves beyond the dimensions that we lionize. And I certainly agree with you. I don't know if this is going to happen on a governmental or a policy level, that we should also uplift those people. I mean, how do we uplift the mother with 3 kids who managed to keep a job, keep her kids educated, and keep them happy, during one of the greatest pandemic in historical memory. You know, I'm not the hero. That's the hero. Those are the heroes. And I do agree that we're paying too much respect to academics, because the human being is not a brain cell alone. I don't know if that answers the question in any way. I'm waffling here, aren't I?
No, it's further eloquence. Many thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Berg has thanked you for a really great discussion. Have you got any question you want to ask Berg whilst you're with us? No? Right. Do we have any other questions for John? I think that could be it, John. I mean, we've got some really good positive comments here, and I've also put a link to your article, John, and one that you wrote on public health at Yale. Yeah. John, there's a question. How can we contact you?
How do I get contacted? Let me try and think. You know what? Actually, I've got various emails in front of me to contact me, which emails to contact me. The best one, it's probably my Yale one. So let me type it in here.
Yeah, if you type it into the chat. And Jumi's put a nice comment in there as well. I think Jumi's a poet. Oh, Jumi shared her poem. Actually, Jumi, do you want to come on and read your poem? That'd be great.
Hello?
Hello, Jumi.
Hello there. Hi.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your poem. Do you want to read it?
Yeah, sure.
We've still got time.
Okay, yeah, sure. Hello, John. Thank you so much for that. Absolutely. Down to earth. I really enjoyed listening to you. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I'm so glad. So I was on mute. I'm so glad. Thank you.
Yeah. You going to read your poem?
Yeah. I'm just pulling it up.
Okay.
So it's called Teach Them.
Yeah.
Teach them. Teach them love. Teach them respect. Teach them the value of humanity, the whole of humanity. Teach them equality and diversity. Teach them to see color, all the colors. Teach them to embrace the similarities and the differences. Teach them empathy. Teach them not to fear the color or to see the color as a barrier to partnership or friendship. Teach them that there are good and bad in every color, and that they should learn to make up their own mind on who is who. Teach them to be brave, to stand on the side of justice, even when it may be a lonely ride. Teach them that we are all God's creation, and that it's the heart of man that truly matters. Teach them that although the world is divided in so many ways, they have the capacity to be the change for building community and peace within their spheres of influence. Teach them.
Thank you.
Bravo. That was powerful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah. Well, this has been a fantastic... Oh, Berg, I don't know if your microphone's working now. You say it wasn't working. Is it working now? And do you want to... we be able to come on and ask a question? Or... I don't know. Because
is there someone else who has a question? I can't see you. I can see the questions here.
Right. People say about how can people find out about your book as well?
Yes, I saw that. So let me just share it. Mm-hmm. So the one that I published yesterday is there. So I can read a little bit of it. So in this book, his second to date and first in this trilogy, medical doctor and Yale University graduate John Ndikum takes you on a journey. In it, he explores why doing well in school might actually be worth your time, explodes myths about being naturally good, provides you with a tailored template of your own, which you can implement to finally achieve the grade you've always wanted. So I've successfully mentored, coached, and guided many students who've gone on to excel in high school, gain admission to medical school, and secure top marks in postgraduate qualifications. So there's that. And then if anyone's interested in my poetry book, which I published in 2016, then you can click on the second link.
There you go.
And then if anybody wants to see my author's page, which I think, you might not find it funny, I find it funny. And the author's page says, medical doctor and Yale University graduate committed to assisting others in becoming the greatest version of themselves. Student of life and aspiring polymath. Husband to a loving wife and father to a trusty canine.
Oh, let me guess. Where did that come from?
Where did I come from? In this life and the next.
Brilliant. I like that. I like that. I'm a Gladiator fan.
Fantastic.
Fantastic. Yeah. This, just to let everyone know, and it's been put up in the chat box, we have recorded this, so it will be available and uploaded next week. I want to thank everybody for coming along to this. It's been wonderful. I've enjoyed hosting it. I've enjoyed listening to the poems. Thank you, Jumi, for
Thank you so much.
sharing your poem. That was beautiful. And John, for your poem. John's poem is going to be featured in the FPM annual report next year, because obviously the annual report 2020 is going to be dominated by COVID. So I definitely want John's poem to be featured there. And we will be putting up on the website as well. And Jumi, I don't know if you would like us to share your poem, just let us know. Be happy to do that as well. But I want to thank everybody for coming along to this wonderful fireside chat, and for John for giving of yourself as well, because I know some of that was difficult, particularly in talking about Malcolm, and you know, it was very moving. We could feel the emotions and we felt it with you. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you so
with
much.
us.
So I really appreciate this opportunity. You've been very kind, and you know, I hope that in some small way we've been able to contribute positively to in the midst of this quagmire. You know, we can make our positive difference.